The following program is a special KPIX presentation.
America, the land of abundance. We have more food to choose from and pay a lower price than any other country in the world. Yet something is amiss in this land of plenty.
I've been very ill. I had 4 miscarriages.
There are other ways of keeping bugs off the plants, but they cut into their profits. And if people get cancer as a result of that, the growers don't care.
The basic reason that we're spraying is the consumer is demanding a clean, gorgeous-looking product.
For the past 40 years, we've been waging chemical warfare against the insects and weeds that threaten our food supply. Now there is mounting fear that those chemical weapons may be turning against us.
Pesticides have actually turned out to be a very mixed blessing. In the Central Valley of California, pesticides have turned into a deadly threat to our lives and to our health.
The chemical revolution that helped produce the greatest cornucopia in the world has now forced us to reap a fearful harvest.
A field of cauliflower waiting to be harvested. Just one of many fields that are part of California's vast $14 billion agricultural industry. Hello, I'm David Burney. You know, it was only 40 years ago that California began an entirely new era in agriculture. It was just then that farmers started to use new and powerful chemicals to kill insects, weeds, and other pests. Today, thanks largely to the intensive use of these chemicals, we produce over 50 million tons of food and fiber products each year. And that makes California the nation's #1 agricultural producer. But now, there are warning signs that this heavy use of pesticides may be harming our health, our environment, and our food. Scientists call it a chemical time bomb.
California's Central Valley, 40 million acres of the richest agricultural land in the world. More than 300,000 pounds of pesticides are being applied to crops each year. These are some of the most toxic chemicals ever invented, and no one can really predict what impact they are having on the land and its people. This region, in effect, has become a human laboratory, its residents unwilling guinea pigs in a large-scale, uncontrolled experiment. Despite strict regulations on the use of pesticides, accidents do happen with unsettling regularity. A low-flying crop duster accidentally sprayed these children as they rode in a school bus in Monterey County. 6 were treated for nausea and abdominal pains. 2 years ago, another crop duster flying over Brad John's farm accidentally doused him and a worker with a highly toxic chemical. He's had health problems ever since. And recently, doctors have told him that he has diabetes.
Who knows what's going to come on next after that? And that's what bothers us, because this 6 to 8 month period where we were having these continual colds, I mean, we'd go from a head cold down to your throat, down into your chest, and then back up again. It just went that way for 6 to 8 months. It would come in waves. We would feel good for 2 or 3 days and then feel bad for a week.
Elizabeth Martin has been helping Johns and other residents of the Central Valley with health and legal advice for the past 5 years.
Okay, on this trip, I'm going to be going down and meeting with that family in Fowler.
As a community organizer, much of her time is spent driving up and down Highway 99, the valley's main street, that connects dozens of communities. Over the years, she has seen the pesticide problem worsen.
When I go into the Central Valley, the primary thing that I find is that people are afraid. People are afraid of what's in their water. People have become to be afraid to eat the fruit that is grown around them. People are afraid to let their children play in the schoolyard because it's next to a field that got sprayed.
Much of the fear has focused on a new and dangerous threat, the discovery that California's groundwater has been contaminated with several pesticides. So far, nearly 3,000 drinking wells throughout the Central Valley and the state have been tainted with chemicals, one of the largest incidents of water contamination in the country. This is how it happened. After 40 years of applying pesticides directly on crops and into the soil, water from irrigation eventually carried many of the chemicals into the ground. Originally, scientists thought that the chemicals would dissolve soon after they were applied, but they were wrong. Instead, the pesticides traveled several feet, in some cases hundreds of feet, until they reached the groundwater basins. Through private and municipal wells, these underground streams supply 40% of the state's drinking water. What this means for the people who have been drinking contaminated water, no one can say for sure.
Hi.
But in the town of Fowler, Pat and Dan Shepard suspect it may be the reason their lives have been turned upside down. A year ago, one of their daughters, Jennifer, was diagnosed with leukemia. After painful chemotherapy, she is now in remission.
She looks very healthy right now, but we don't know from one day to the next whether she's going to be with us or not. We don't know when it could happen. It could happen at any time.
When they discovered that Jennifer was the third child in Fowler to be struck with cancer, the Shepards immediately suspected it was more than mere coincidence.
We just more or less just didn't feel like it was normal, you know, for 3 children to have leukemia. So we started looking for possible answers to why. And the first step was to have the water rechecked.
The Shepards started writing letters to Sacramento and local officials to have the cancer cases investigated. Their search for answers has consumed much of their lives.
I thought I had the most perfect life before Jenny came down with leukemia. I was content here in my house. I was just perfect little mommy being at home. You're just so driven when you have a sick child. You're driven to a point, sometimes you just think, I can't stop, I can't stop.
From his barbershop, Dan was able to talk to many of the town's residents about the cancer problem. He and his wife organized a community meeting at their house with the help of Elizabeth Martin.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody tonight at Pat and Dan Shepard's house.
Attending the meeting is the town's mayor, who tells them that the latest tests show the water is safe to drink.
If we have a problem, I'm sure the city is going to do something about it, but it has to be identified as a problem to begin with before we can take any action.
The problem is there. Aren't you aware of all the cancer here in Fowler?
But is it a problem of the water?
The news is greeted with skepticism by people like Helen Guerra, whose 10-year-old son died of cancer last year, and Cindy Hoops, who was sprayed by pesticides when she was a child and still has health problems today.
You don't get a choice when your water becomes contaminated or your food becomes contaminated, like the people eating the watermelons on 4th of July.
Choice. If you don't like the water, buy it.
That's not a solution, you know. I think what most people talk about when they say choice is that they know what's going on.
The meeting ends with more questions raised than answered, but that doesn't discourage Pat and Dan.
We thought we had the 2 most healthy children in the world until this problem came. And we know what we've gone through. And if there's any way, anything we can do to prevent that from happening to another person, to another family, and going through this hurt, this pain, then we will do whatever we have to do to prevent that from happening to someone else.
A recent medical survey supports Dan's concern. It revealed that 9 people in this town have actually been diagnosed with cancer. 7 of them are children. The numbers are unusually high for a town of 3,000. Fresno County has now begun an investigation, something the Shepards can take credit for. But they're not the only ones trying to do something about the valley's health crisis.
Angry people throughout the valley are beginning to hold house meetings, are beginning to go to their county supervisors and saying, let's not wait until the federal government does something. Let's take action right now in our own county to protect us.
And that's what really makes you mad.
In Bakersfield, it was Diane Cogdell's outrage that brought the pesticide issue into the open in her community. It started when Diane and other parents in the neighborhood began to notice their kids suffering from unusual problems.
My daughter's tongue would break out in sores. We don't know what it was. My son, in 1980, was tested for low testosterone because he had stopped growing.
I started questioning the fact that my little boy would come home from school and his gland would be swollen. And this would be during the week when he'd go to school. Then it would go down and go away. Summertime when he was out of school, no problem.
With my daughter, we had a lot of nausea and vomiting and diarrhea. I thought she had the flu, but the pain was so excruciating that she would cry and get to screaming, and I thought maybe it was her appendix.
Last year, this health mystery suddenly became clearer. A news report revealed that the underground water supply at their children's elementary school contained unhealthy levels of a pesticide. The parents were shocked to learn that their children had been drinking contaminated water for 5 years. Even more disturbing, the local health department had warned school officials of the danger, but they never notified the parents or took any action to correct the problem.
Nothing you can do now can erase the fact that you've exposed my kid to cancer.
At a school board meeting soon after the news broke, angry parents demanded and received the superintendent's resignation.
You care about their minds, but you poison their bodies, and you know since 1979.
I have a daughter that is in high school now that went all the way through school out here. If I'd have known in 74 that, or whenever she started here, then I would have sent bottled water with her. I'd have paid for the bottled water.
But the parents are still concerned about the long-term health effects of the pesticide their children were exposed to, dibromochlorophane, or DBCP, a known carcinogen. It has contaminated over 2,400 wells in the state. It was banned in 1977 when it was found to cause sterility in men. The amount of DBCP found in the Norris School water exceeded the safe levels.
You live with a fear now whenever your child gets sick. Is this related to drinking DBCP water? My child has been violated. Their body has been violated, and it has been violated, knowingly violated, by a chemical, DBCP, and you're looking at a mother bear that's going to protect her cubs.
The pesticide issue has brought Diane and other parents together under the Valley Action Network, a group that has members in several communities. One of them is McFarland, about 40 miles north of Bakersfield. Of all the towns, McFarland has been the hardest hit. 10 children have been diagnosed with cancer in the past 2 years. 2 children have already died, an abnormally high rate for a population of 6,400 people.
This community has been traumatized. We never know from one day to the next if our other children are going to start showing signs of cancer. There's a story about the coal miners. When they would go down, they would carry canaries with them, and when the canaries died, they knew to get out of the mines. And I think that's what's happening here right now, is that our children are canaries, and their warning is that there's a problem.
Connie Rosales has led the fight for an investigation of the cancer problem. Her only son, Randy, has cancer of the lymph glands. Once again, the suspect is pesticides.
This is a small town, very small. On each side of our town, all 4 corners, there's every type of crop. There's such a diversity of crops, and there's so many different chemicals that are being used.
The San Joaquin Valley water system is in serious jeopardy from toxic contamination.
This past summer, Connie and other parents were able to get the attention of State Senator Art Torres, who heads the Committee on Toxics and Public Safety. During an emotional hearing, the town's residents spoke of their fears and frustrations.
I've been very ill. I had 4 miscarriages. And ever since, I'm afraid because I think it's pesticides.
I have 2 other children besides my daughter, and I do not want to go through that pain again. And me, as a mother, and anybody else that's a mother, cannot go through that pain again.
We want answers now. I can't bring her back, and neither can anybody else. But if I find out what it is, and if I can prevent other kids from being stricken with cancer, then I'd be satisfied. That's the only the reason I'm here, so other kids won't get sick.
Because of the hearing and community pressure, health officials have started a full-scale study, but they readily admit that finding a cause will be difficult, if not impossible. This is true for many of the communities plagued by unusually high rates of cancer and other diseases. Like the needle in the haystack, looking for causes of illness in the environment is an almost insurmountable task, and pesticide manufacturers doubt that none of the pesticides found in the groundwater is a health threat to residents of the Central Valley, including DBCP.
DBCP, it's not our product and never was, but as I look at it as a scientist, it was a learning experience. I don't think that DBCP is a substantial, imminent threat to anybody's health. If they find it, they're simply going to treat the water at the tap, or they're going to find an alternate supply. And, you know, I think that's prudent, and I don't worry about another DBCP incident or chemical occurring. It's just not going to happen.
The chemical companies were wrong about DBCP. Their tests showed originally that it would never leach into the groundwater. Now it has contaminated over 2,000 wells, and scientists say that it will remain in the water for over 100 years. This kind of unpredictability and uncertainty makes people wonder, have we lost control over the safe use of these pesticides? Recently, that question hit home for hundreds of consumers.
Last 4th of July, Californians were startled by the news that a favorite summer pastime had suddenly become dangerous to their health. 500 people became violently ill after eating watermelons contaminated by a pesticide. Deborah Martellotti was one of the victims. She was 9 months pregnant when she became sick.
Great strawberries? During the vomiting and diarrhea, my biggest concern was for the baby. I was 9 months pregnant at the time, and the severe vomiting and diarrhea brought on false labor, which, as we understand now, it's the dehydration that was happening in my body caused me to go into labor.
Deborah's illness was caused by the illegal use of one of the most poisonous pesticides in use today, Aldicarb. Aldicarb, manufactured by Union Carbide under the trade name Temic. It kills insects and tiny parasites. It is so toxic that it is restricted to only a few food crops and cotton in California. One tiny drop of Aldicarb can kill a human being. Aldicarb is made from the same chemical that killed more than 2,000 people when it leaked from a Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, India. In California, watermelons were contaminated because Aldicarb was used illegally. Now the Environmental Protection Agency is taking another look at it to see if it should be banned.
I don't accept that a chemical should be taken off the market because it's illegally used. And that's basically the assumption some of these environmental groups are making, that these compounds should be taken off the market because Aldicarb can be illegal use, such as a case in California with the watermelons.
To dismiss it merely as misuse is, I guess, optimistic. I think it points out very major flaws with the system of relying on labels to assure safe use of chemicals. The labels clearly told growers how to use it. They clearly defied the labels.
After the watermelon incident, state inspectors discovered the illegal use of Aldicarb in a broccoli field in Monterey County. In 1982, it was suspected in the poisonings of 12 people in Bakersfield. And in 1978, 14 people in Nebraska were poisoned by cucumbers contaminated with Aldicarb. And there is more to Aldicarb's troubled past.
5 years ago, this chemical surprised scientists at Union Carbide when it was found in drinking wells in Long Island, New York. Since then, it has contaminated groundwater in 12 other states, most recently in California. According to Union Carbide's own tests, aldicarb breaks down very quickly after it's applied to a crop, so it should not have leached into the groundwater.
The initial data that we collected was collected in specific areas of the country, which unfortunately did not duplicate the type of environmental conditions which are found in areas such as Long Island. And because of that, we did not know that the product would get into groundwater and therefore persist for a period longer than we had anticipated.
Other questions continue to be raised about the safeness of this pesticide. Recently, scientists at the University of Wisconsin discovered that low levels of aldicarb in drinking water damaged the immune system of mice. But what amazed scientists was that the lower the levels of aldicarb, the greater the damage to the mice. It's not clear what these latest findings mean for human health, and more studies are needed, but it worries public health officials.
I am not convinced that the public health is well served by the continued sale of aldicarb, and it seems to me the public health risks certainly outweigh the public health benefits.
I wonder what all this is all about.
For Deborah Martelletti, her bout of illness with aldicarb poisoning ended after about 12 hours. She went on to have a normal pregnancy and delivered a healthy girl. But she is troubled by uncertainty.
I didn't die from it, but how do we know what's going to happen years down the road? We do know that aldicarb causes cancer. And what's going to happen to my daughter? How do we know how much affected her? And those kinds of questions are not answered for me yet. And that's a big fear that I have.
Deborah's fear is shared by others who believe that aldicarb is only a small part of a much larger problem. There are hundreds of pesticides that are under a cloud of uncertainty. Uncertainty about how they may be harming humans and the environment. Last year, the National Academy of Sciences issued a report revealing the extent of our ignorance about pesticides. Only 10% of all pesticides had complete health data. 38% had no toxicity information at all. This lack of knowledge is a potential threat to everyone, but without question, the ones who face the most risk are the people who work with or around these chemicals. Agricultural workers have one of the highest rates of work-related illnesses in the country. For them, the symptoms that people experienced in the watermelon poisonings are all too common. And in the last few years, there's been a new and disturbing trend. Farm worker women from various parts of the state have been reporting an increasing number of birth defects.
I'm a pediatrician, and I became interested in this whole area of environmental health during my pediatric training when I was working in the intensive care nursery. And I remember at one point 3 babies came from the Modesto area, and all of them had severe heart defects. And a couple of weeks later, 3 more babies came from the Salinas area, and all 3 of them had severe abdominal wall defects. And I remember the nurses saying there must be something going on down there. There must be something in these pesticides, because these people, these things really seem to be occurring in these clusters or bunches at a time.
It's very difficult to link pesticide poisonings to birth defects. But Ramona Franco has no doubt in her mind about what happened to her son. In March of 1981, Felipe Franco was born without any arms or legs. 9 months earlier, Ramona, in the first weeks of her pregnancy, had been working in a grape field recently sprayed with pesticides. Now she is suing the companies that manufactured those chemicals.
We looked at her genetic history and found that it was uneventful, that there was nothing in her genetic history that would explain this circumstance. And a medical examination of the mother revealed that she carried evidence of having been exposed to these types of chemicals, or a chemical that can have a serious impact upon her body systems.
One of the pesticides that Ramona Franco was allegedly exposed to is Captan. Captan, manufactured by Stauffer Chemical and Chevron Chemical Companies. It's used on grapes and almonds to kill fungus. Captan is also used on home products like shampoos and mattresses. Laboratory tests on animals show that Captan causes cancer and gene mutation, and preliminary tests show that it may cause birth defects. There's a growing scientific belief that Captan is similar to thalidomide, a sleeping drug manufactured in the 1950s. Thalidomide was blamed for the birth of 8,000 malformed babies with shortened limbs. Doctors treating Felipe Franco say his condition is similar to the thalidomide cases. Ramona Franco can no longer work as a farm worker because Felipe's severe physical handicaps demand full-time care. She says her hope is to raise him as normally as possible. Meanwhile, this past summer, the Environmental Protection Agency issued a report citing unacceptable residues of Captan in our food. And they have recommended that the use of Captan on all food products be banned. But the chemical companies are challenging the EPA, and because of the long review process, the ban may not go into effect for 2 more years, if at all.
The EPA started its review in 1980 of Captan because it was found to be carcinogenic and mutagenic, and has waited for 5 years to announce its position that 2, 3, 4 years from now, it will ultimately phase out the use of the chemical. All this time, the public has been exposed to the chemical, and we believe those residues, that exposure has been dangerous.
Chevron declined to talk about the Franco case because of litigation, but they did predict that Captan will ultimately receive a clean bill of health from the federal government.
The calculations that caused EPA to have a special review of Captan, whether or not it should be banned, were very, very conservative. They were the worst of the worst case assumptions. And I'm very confident that once EPA goes and looks at all the data that exists right now, that they're going to still allow Captan to be used. Used according to label instructions, Captan is not a problem.
It's been 13 years since Congress directed the Environmental Protection Agency to fill the so-called data gap and test hundreds of pesticides for their health effects. Today, after several deadline extensions, only 6 have been completely tested. So we remain largely in the dark about the possible health hazards of hundreds of chemicals. Now, whatever the fates of Captan and aldicarb and other pesticides under investigation, it's clear it takes the government too long to answer important safety questions. How this affects all of us as consumers is the next part of our story.
Oranges, you want 88, right?
4 o'clock on a Monday morning at the produce market in South San Francisco. From this vast warehouse, more than 2 million pounds of fruits and vegetables are sold to stores throughout the Bay Area every day.
5 cucumbers, 5 cans.
The market is full of buyers who arrive early to get the pick of the best products.
I'd like to pick up a couple.
Oh, sure. What would you like?
But this man is not here to buy produce. He's Ron Thompson, an inspector with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. His job is to take samples of food from the market and have it tested for pesticide contamination.
In my sampling procedure, why I select a particular orange over another orange, normally it would be strictly random. Unless I open the carton up and would either smell something or I would see something on there that I would suspect was a pesticide or a residue, in which case then I would try to make a sample of one that would best carry the most residue that I could see.
Thompson has an almost impossible task. He is only one of 3 inspectors in the Bay Area. Not only are they responsible for checking food in this wholesale market, but they must also inspect food at individual supermarkets, packing sheds, and farms.
Good morning, Claudia.
Working against the clock, Thompson takes his samples to a state laboratory. If any of the food is found to be contaminated, then inspectors must track down the farm where it came from and quarantine the crop before it reaches the consumer. This particular sample passed inspection, but with 34,000 tons of food being distributed throughout markets all over California each and every day, the chances of contaminated food slipping through the state's screening system are very high. And that is what happened with the watermelons containing aldicarb.
The system is designed to prevent
this kind of occurrence, but it's like any other system or any other form of law enforcement. You know, if you have somebody that's intent on breaking the law and not really concerned about the consequences, you can't catch everybody.
I think there is a lot more significance to it. I think that one of the most significant things is that people actually got sick in the state of California and other states, and that's how we determined that there was misuse. The federal government, state government programs absolutely failed to detect this misuse, and it wasn't until people got physically ill that we discovered the problem.
In order for the state's pesticide monitoring program to work, it must depend on the honor system, that farmers will obey the laws and not misuse the chemicals. And most do follow the rules, but there's little punishment for those who don't. Last year, authorities issued over 1,400 notices of pesticide violations. Only 18 resulted in criminal complaints.
Well, we have had a certain problem with county district attorneys not being real willing to take our cases on, and that's for a couple of reasons, really. One is that these tend to be kind of esoteric things. They're not used to dealing with pesticide laws. And two is that they don't consider them as important as, you know, rape or murder or a big robbery, and so they tend to not prioritize them.
Holes in the state screening system means that inevitably pesticides are in our food. But there's disagreement over how much and how dangerous the amounts are. Laurie Mott thinks consumers are in danger. She supervised an independent test of sample produce from San Francisco markets and found that 44% contained pesticide residues, a much higher level than what the state usually detects in its own tests.
We clearly have some flaws in the government system, and that the government needs to address those flaws. The most likely toxic effects resulting from exposure to residues in food are chronic effects, effects that will occur years after the exposure to the compound. And it is virtually impossible, both statistically and from an obvious, common sense point of view, to link that effect that may occur 10 to 15 years after you have been eating the contaminated apples or whatever, back to that actual contaminated apple.
But pesticide manufacturers argue that the amounts of pesticides in our food are insignificant.
The dangers that they pose to the consumer on the foods they eat are minimal. I mean, and it's a risk-benefit approach, but the risks are calculated in a very conservative manner by the Environmental Protection Agency before you can even register a product for use.
Over a lifetime, will the pesticides in our foods harm us? Well, no one knows. Not even the experts know for sure. But the picture is not entirely gloomy. Some farmers are successfully using alternatives to toxic pesticides.
Early morning in Orosi, California. Located in the San Joaquin Valley near the Sierra foothills, the surrounding mountains create a natural barrier against wind and harsh weather. Nestled on a hill overlooking this valley is Ecology Sound Farms. For the past 23 years, Norm and Palma Freestone, along with their two boys, have farmed oranges and kiwis in the valley below. Good weather and a healthy market for citrus has made their farm one of the most successful in Orosi. But 8 years ago, tragedy struck when Norm became violently ill. The suspect, pesticides.
Some of the problems that were associated with my pesticide poisoning were initially skin cancers, were physical fatigues, insomnia, muscle and nerve twitching, lack of feeling in the extremities.
At night he would have muscle twitches, erratic sleep patterns, leg cramps, and then personality changes, mood changes, depression, and we didn't know what was wrong with him. Couldn't figure it out.
After examinations at several hospitals, doctors discovered high amounts of pesticides in Norm's liver and body fat, amounts so high that it damaged his immune system.
The doctor said I had a 21st century illness caused by exposures to pesticides, and that really there was no way of knowing whether in fact I would recover. And she suggested that I move away from my farming area and my lifestyle and move either to the mountains or to the coast. We found about 15 or 20 moths in our pheromone trap.
Rather than give up farming, he decided to give up pesticides. Today, Norm Freestone is successfully farming without the use of chemicals. He's one of 400 growers in California who have found an alternative to the pesticide treadmill. They're called organic farmers, and they use a variety of non-chemical techniques. The most effective of these is biocontrol.
Well, the basis for organic farming is trying to farm in balance with nature. That is, to farm biologically with the insects that nature has to offer. For example, 88% of the insects are our friends. They are not pests. And if we can work with these insects, then we can reduce our costs and increase our efficiency by having nature do the work for us.
At the University of California, Berkeley, scientists are unlocking the secrets of biocontrol by studying the habits of insects. What you are looking at is nature's own form of pest control. The brown insect on the right is the lacewing larva. It is completely harmless to plant life, but is the natural enemy of pests like these green aphids. The lacewing attacks randomly, grabbing the aphid with its front pincher, literally draining it of its life. One lacewing might kill 50 to 100 aphids a day. Since the populations of good bugs vary from year to year, insectaries like Rincon vitova in Ventura, California, provide Norm Freestone with millions of these beneficial insects. Over 6 species of beneficial insects are cultivated at Rincon vitova. These ladybugs, for example, are used to attack pests like aphids and moths that feed on apples and avocados. Since most pesticides do not distinguish between good and bad bugs, the potential harm to the beneficial insect is increased during applications. Many farmers, not just organic, are beginning to see the irony in such a practice.
Many conventional farmers become addicted to the use of chemical insecticides because once they've sprayed, they create an artificially sterile environment in the field. This wipes out not only the pests, but the beneficial insects. So once you've applied the first time, you've got to keep applying to keep the pests in control.
In the past, it was common for the Freestone farm to spray their kiwi trees 8 to 9 times a year to control pests. Today, they use a good bug purchased from Rincon vitova called trichogramma. On this paper card are over 7,000 unhatched trichogramma eggs. The cards are cut into small squares and attached to the trees. When the good bugs emerge in 10 days, they will attack and kill the eggs of the omnivorous leaf roller, a small worm that burrows holes in the side of kiwis, causing them to prematurely drop. If the farmer wanted to control the leaf roller with conventional pesticides, the cost would be between $35 and $100 per acre. For Norm Freestone, to release beneficial insects, the cost per acre is about $15.
The cost in organic farming is basically in labor. It's the labor of monitoring your beneficial insects or your pests. It's the labor in checking your rodents and your gophers. It's this type of labor that is increasing only at the rate of, say, 5 to 7% a year. But the chemical farmer has the burden of chemical costs rising at the rate of 15 to 30% a year. So in the long run, our costs will not nearly be as great as a chemical farmer's cost.
The decision made by Norm Freestone to farm organically was not based upon economics. It was a health decision. Today, Norm Freestone is alive. His life might have taken a much different turn had he continued to farm with pesticides.
I've farmed with pesticides for 15 years before I made the transition over to organic farming. And of course, I used pesticides because they were very efficient. It was a very effective way to control insects, and that is kill living organisms. How times change. I'm very concerned about the health of my family and of my children. I want them to grow up in a clean environment, clean air, clean water, and clean foods, all free of pesticide residues. I think organic farming is one method to correct the pollution of our environment, to clean up our lands, to offer a profitable alternative to the pesticide treadmill that farming is experiencing today.
In California, less than 1% of the state's 50,000 farmers grow organically. Now, if biocontrol works, why haven't more of them switched to organic farming? Well, the simple truth is that you and I, as consumers, are partly responsible.
The Salinas Valley is one of the richest agricultural areas in California. Much of the lettuce, celery, and tomatoes that we buy come from this valley south of San Jose. Farmers here depend upon toxic pesticides to control pests and ensure that their crops get to the market. If organic growers are successfully farming without chemicals by using biocontrol, why can't these growers do the same? Norm Martella has been farming the Salinas Valley for 25 years. To plant, cultivate, and harvest this 250-acre farm cost upwards of $1 million, an investment he could lose without pesticides.
If we stop spraying tomorrow, the first thing we'd probably have is an infestation of aphid within about a 10-day period. That infestation of aphid would more than likely eat the heart out of the small plants, and there wouldn't be any cauliflower to harvest. The plant would be dead at that point in time.
So why doesn't biocontrol work here? Essentially, there are three reasons. First, the type of crops grown here make this area very vulnerable to insect damage. Unlike Norm Freestone's kiwi and orange trees, vegetables like lettuce and tomatoes and these cauliflower plants grow very low to the ground where worms and caterpillars can easily attack them. Second, the time from planting to harvest in these crops is only about 90 days, and in most cases it just isn't enough time for the beneficial insects to do their job effectively. Produce damage would be inevitable. Third is cost.
You can take one crop, such as lettuce, that in this valley they ship about 400,000 boxes of lettuce a day. That, because of the damage and because of non-growth without the use of herbicides and insecticides, would probably drop to about 30,000 units a day. In the United States, the cost of that would be just a fantastic increase in the cost of the consumer.
But there is another reason farmers use pesticides, and it's probably the most important: the consumer. When we shop for produce, we demand perfect-looking, bug-free fruits and vegetables.
I don't know enough about the pesticides that they use to let that affect the choice. The perfection in the produce is more important to me.
The whole thing goes in the garbage if I find bugs in my lettuce. I don't like bugs.
Bugs on my lettuce would just be probably the most disgusting thing I can really imagine. And I certainly wouldn't buy something like that.
The basic reason that we're spraying is the consumer is demanding a clean, gorgeous-looking product. If I could eliminate one spray per year on the lettuce crop that I grow, I would save approximately $10,000 in cost against that crop. So, logically speaking, if I could eliminate it, I would, readily and as rapidly as I could.
It's clear that most farmers can't grow organically, and yet would like to reduce their use of pesticides. And what are the alternatives? The answer for many farmers in California may be integrated pest management, or IPM. For the last 10 years, Ladera Ranch in Ventura has farmed 250 acres of oranges using IPM. Unlike organic farming, IPM combines biocontrol with some chemical spraying.
So when we have to spray, we'll do it as a last resort, and we'll choose the least toxic substance that we can use to control the problem that we have. And the considerations there are that it has to be very easy on the beneficials and have a very short-term effect, no residual effect.
Through IPM, the Ladera Ranch has also been able to cut back on the need to spray by using a variety of cultural practices. For example, they were able to eliminate the need for snail poisons by simply pruning the lower branches or skirts of their orange trees.
Okay, this is an example of the way our skirts used to look before we started doing the skirt pruning practice. And as you can see, there's holes in the leaves and where the snails have climbed up into the tree, and they have access to the tree all the way around the canopy because the skirts are touching the ground. Here's an example of one of our trees where we've skirt pruned to eliminate access into the canopy of the tree. The snails' only access to the tree now is up the main trunk of the tree. And once we get them with limited access to the main trunk, then we apply a copper band in which they won't cross. And so now we've eliminated our snail problem virtually with this measure. So we wanted to get to a place where we were actually working on the problem, a long-term solution, something we could live with for year in and year out. We also were concerned about safety of people who have to work in the orchards and what the consumer gets. We're real concerned with that.
Integrated pest management is helping the Ladera Ranch reduce their dependence on pesticides. For the consumer, the news is even better. With IPM, orange farmers are able to produce in high volume. In the long run, that means low costs. But more research needs to be done on crops like lettuce and tomatoes. For Norm Martella, spraying is still the most effective way to control pests, despite the high cost of the chemicals. Costs that now eat up about 15% of the average grower's budget in the Salinas Valley.
Farmers don't want to waste their money on pesticides if they can find a natural way to take care of their problem. There isn't a farmer today that has money to waste on anything. They would love to know that they didn't have to use pesticides and they could still get a good yield from their farmland. They'd be very happy. They'd make more money. They'd love to. But they don't want to bet the farm on it.
There is no question that the economic incentives for moving away from chemicals are going to increase. I don't see any possible future where we're not going to move towards reducing pesticide use. The question is how long is it going to take us to do it? How many people are going to have to be poisoned? How expensive is it going to have to get before we decide that it's a priority to put taxpayer money and entrepreneurial money into developing alternatives to pesticides?
Lawmakers in Sacramento are aware of the need to cut down on pesticide use. More money has recently been approved to expand the research into alternatives so that growers like Norm Martella can use them. Statistics, too, may be signaling a change. In the last few years, pesticide use in the United States has actually leveled off. And in California, there's been a big increase reported in the sale of organically grown produce. But have we actually started to turn the corner on this problem? It's clear that until scientists develop alternatives for the majority of farmers to use, pesticides will be necessary to maintain our abundant food supply. But it's also clear that we seem to have lost control over the safe application of these chemicals, and our health and environment are in danger. But there are signs of positive change. For the first time, environmentalists and pesticide manufacturers are sitting down together to try to improve the nation's major pesticide law. In California, the legislature is considering several bills that deal with many of the health and environment problems we've seen. And there are also efforts to put more teeth into the law to punish people who misuse pesticides. Now, will these new laws help to defuse the chemical time bomb? Well, that remains to be seen. In the meantime, there is something we can do as consumers. If we're willing to accept less than perfect-looking fruits and vegetables and pay more, we can reduce our dependence on pesticides. Now, the question for us is simple. Do the risks outweigh the benefits? I'm David Burney. Good night.